Hi guys, I just wrapped up my playthrough of Star Wars Jedi Survivor and I'm going to be reviewing it for you in this video without any spoilers at all. My review code was provided by EA, so thank you to them. And the spoilers thing I'm going to be very, very careful about because there are some really important moments in this game's story that were so much fun to experience for the first time without any idea that they were about to happen. And so the first thing I want to say in this review for you as a recommendation is that if you really care about this game's story, get off the internet now. Seriously, just unbookmark Twitter or YouTube or whatever until you finish the game. And then when you've got through some of those big twists and turns, you can thank me later. So on the topic of story, let's discuss that a little more, but again, without spoilers. So my playthrough clocked in at around about 25 hours. I did a reasonable amount of side questing, especially towards the beginning of my playthrough, which is what you're watching now, so that I don't inadvertently spoil anything from later in the game. And I also listened through all the dialogue options that I was ever given when I was talking to a character, and that definitely took a while. So I think some people will probably end up clocking in campaign completions around 20 hours, maybe even less, but not a lot less because it's a really deep game and the temptation to get off that main track and explore some of the areas around you or to just do a couple of those rumor side quests is always there and it's very strong. The story itself, I really thoroughly enjoyed. I think that there's always a risk with a game like this that because it's Star Wars and it's sci-fi, you can get bogged down in talking about thingamajigs and who's-a-ma-what's-its, and you kind of end up feeling a bit distant from what's going on because it's just all technobabble the whole time. And there's also a risk with these sorts of games that you're going to end up with some kind of thing that you might need to construct or build or find or whatever. And it's like, okay, it's split into 5 pieces and they're on 5 different worlds. And so you just need to go to 5 different locations to get them. And while this game obviously does have you going to different worlds to find bits and pieces or talk to certain characters or whatever, I think it's very graceful in the way that it does that. There were never any moments where I was sort of sitting there going, ugh, now I just have to get the 3rd piece of this object or whatever. Like, that happens so often in these sorts of games, and they dodged it completely, which I was so grateful for. And I think they do a really good job in the story of bringing you into the fold, even if you didn't play the Fallen Order game that came out a few years ago. There's a little cutscene at the beginning, which gives you a little flavor of what happened in that game, but it doesn't really explain things so much as it does maybe just give you a little bit of a sprinkling of what characters looked like in that previous game, but it didn't matter. And I hadn't played Fallen Order before playing Jedi Survivor, which some of you might think is absolute heresy. I think I was just really busy at the time when it came out and I've never gotten around to it, but it wasn't important. It didn't matter in this game. And I still had a really good time. I still felt really connected to all of the characters and overall didn't feel like I was missing essential context, which was really appreciated. They also play around nicely with things like force ghosts or force memories or whatever you would call those sorts of things. There are several flashbacky style moments. In fact, there's one very early in the game where Cal is actually looking at a basically video coming out of BD on the holodeck. And it's just a nice way to think back on things that I assume were in the previous game or at least referenced there. And so that's nostalgia for some fans, but for new players, it's just some helpful context as to what the hell's going on. So that was all done very, very well. And I think that Respawn really need to be given some credit for how seamless they've managed to make that process for new players. Because I didn't feel also like I was being laboriously dragged through exposition to get caught up to speed. They did very, very well. The pace of the story is also really wonderful. I think they've done a pretty incredible job of making you feel like it's building up to this grand Act 3, and then Act 3 just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe I had my expectations set too low, but I went into this pretty simplistically thinking, okay, I just need to like take out this one bad guy and do this thing and save this person, and then it'll be game over and it'll just be a neatly wrapped up story. But instead, there were so many sort of twists and turns and surprises that were so fantastic, and some really wonderful moments where they used just a little snapshot of story to create a gameplay moment that was really powerful, even if it was only for the benefit of one little moment of the game. And that kind of brings us to the gameplay section of the video, but first I just want to say one thing about the ending. Again, spoiler free. I just got finished with Dead Island 2 before playing this game, and Dead Island 2 is a pretty cliffhangery ending. And I was terrified I'm going to be honest, I was absolutely terrified that we were going to get a similar thing here where I would be left just sort of annoyed at the fact that there was clearly more to be done and that I wanted to do it now, but the game had ended so I couldn't. Instead though, I'd say this game ends in pretty much the perfect place. It's not in a position where I don't feel like there are questions or mysteries still present. There absolutely are, and I know the wider picture in the narrative of Star Wars as to where things need to go here. But zooming in on that kind of microscopic level in the minutiae, exactly what needed to happen happens. It doesn't feel like I was building to some grand conclusion and then there wasn't a conclusion, or the conclusion was sort of split in half and I didn't get that second half because they're saving it for DLC or for the next game or whatever. It felt really complete, and again, I want to give Respawn credit for this because they could so easily have drawn it out into some kind of DLC pack or whatever in the future, but no, it's not their style clearly, and they've made a really complete and neatly tied up package here. And that goes for the side quests and things like that as well. There's so many side quests in the game. They're called Rumours, and you'll talk to characters and just get quest after quest after quest. And that might sound like it's laborious or a bit frustrating, but a lot of them are really cool. Or maybe if cool is the wrong word, they are at least varied enough or low effort enough that it doesn't matter that there's a lot of them. But one thing I did have a really big issue with was the fact that there isn't a conventional save file system in the game. I don't have loads of save slots where I can save a character's progress at various points in the story. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is that there were a few moments in a couple of different either side quests or in the main story where something would happen and maybe I'd have a choice. Maybe I'd be able to do one thing or another, and I'd really, really want to be able to reload my save and make a different choice on occasion. Or maybe I accidentally trigger an encounter with a group of stormtroopers too early and they die in a funny way, but I wasn't ready for it, and so I missed the funny thing happening. And I would love in those moments to be able to just reload my save in order to see it again. But several times through the story, I tried to do those things by just throwing myself off a ledge or something, and it wouldn't work. And I think that the game itself suffers because of this, because it left me with a lot of regret, wondering what I might have missed, or whether something that I did was an actual choice I was making, or whether the game just reacted differently the second time around or whatever. Again, keeping this spoiler free, there was something that happened towards the very end of the game that really gave me this kind of, oh my god, do I have FOMO right now? Or do I have kind of regret at the choice I made or the choice I didn't make? Maybe it wasn't even a choice, I just don't know. But I wish I had a save file so I could load it back and find out. So that's really bringing us to gameplay now, so let's talk about that. One of the biggest questions I got asked by folks that knew I was going to be reviewing the game is, what's the backtracking like? Because different people have different expectations here. Some people thought that there was going to be loads and loads and loads of backtracking. Others thought that they might have had a bit less of that this time. And it turns out that there is absolutely tons of it. And you don't get a lot of the abilities that you need to successfully clear out areas completely until pretty deep into the main story, even really right towards the end. And I found this a little frustrating at first because I basically got to one of the main hub planets and then just started exploring, trying to find everything I possibly could and trying to clear areas, but kept running into issues where I just couldn't get through certain doors because they were locked right now, but I'd be able to unlock them in future. Now, something I think that they have done very well is they've made a very concerted effort in the level design to ensure that if, for example, there is a door that you cannot pass through yet, there will still be some kind of reward before the door in that area. So you never feel like you've pushed out and explored a new area for nothing. Like, you still got something, you just didn't 100% clear it, and you'll have to come back later in the story in order to be able to basically be a completionist and clear out that zone. What this meant, though, is that early in the game, I was trying to be a completionist, like I said, wasn't able to be, and then I pretty much got put off doing a lot of exploring, and so I just straight-lined the rest of the main story, and that meant that I think I maybe missed a little bit of flavor of the world as I was going through, but not in a way that was a real detriment to my my playthrough, and the fact that I'm going to be able to go back through now at the end of the game and continue exploring, which is something you can do, is really, really appreciated. There's no hard sort of stop on the game here, and so all of that progress that I made so far, I can continue. And because of all those side quests and rumors that I mentioned, it means that even if you have partially cleared areas, there may still be new things popping up in those places thanks to other things you've triggered in the world that mean that going back through that space is different the second or third time. For example, there might be a bounty hunter that's coming to hunt you down and they're in a specific zone that you might have already cleared part of, but then when you go to complete the rest of it, you fight the bounty hunter as part of it, or you fight a big monster or whatever. And thankfully also, the map in the game is very effective at telling you where is or isn't accessible at a given time, so you aren't usually left guessing or wondering. I know there were some concerns about the map from people that hadn't played it just yet, but from everything I experienced, I thought the map actually was really useful. And there is also a Journey Plus option, which allows you to run back through the game, but with a couple of free perks enabled, depending on your preference. One of them randomizes your character outfit on death, which I think is hilarious. Another is a kind of high stakes version of the game where you do a lot more damage with your lightsaber, but enemies also do a lot more damage. And the third just customizes the enemies that you'll actually be facing, so they'll either be stronger or they'll have different move sets, which sounds so freaking cool. And the fact that they've done that after you've already put 25 hours into the game beating the story is so amazing. Massively incentivizes you to play it again, and you also get extra lightsaber colors, which people would be pleased to hear. The combat in the game was really fluid and I thought fantastic throughout. There were so many different options in the combat for my playstyle to really grow and flourish on the battlefield. So I could choose different stances for my saber that would massively affect the force skills that I might be using at a given time, or the way I'd be throwing my lightsaber, or the way I'd be blocking, the way I'd be parrying, etc. Each of those stances felt really distinct and unique, and I ended up picking one fairly early that I really enjoyed used that a bunch, and then got another later in the game that I thought was so freaking cool, and so that ended up being my second go-to. But honestly, I could have jumped to any other stance, I think, there, and had a really good time with that as well. The enemies feel varied, their animations, the way that they attack you, their sort of movement, their IQ, all of it feels really perfectly tuned. And the way that they come together as groups as well also works fantastically. Like being able to use one enemy that you know is going to behave a certain way in order to attack a certain other enemy is so satisfying. And when you're chaining those sorts of moves together with the Force and with your lightsaber itself as well, it leads to a very fun combat sandbox. But I do think the game suffers a little bit in the middle of the story in being a bit easy. I thought that there were certain encounters, especially with sort of mini bosses in the world, that were just too straightforward. I would do them first time. I didn't really struggle. I didn't have to use a lot of heals. And I don't really know why that was the case. I don't know if it was because I was over leveled, because I did a little bit of exploring early, or if it was for some other reason. And I also did find that, especially later in the game, certain fights would kind of get a little boring because certain enemies kind of counter a lot of your combat sandbox options. And so you're sort of forced to fight them in one or two different ways, but one of the ways is a lot of lightsaber throws just to get chip damage, and then a lot of blocks. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that that whole sort of stability and block meter thing shouldn't be in the game. I'm just saying that it got to a point where I'd be fighting main bosses, like real key bosses in the game, and it would sort of be reduced to press L1, press L1 again, press L1 again in the combat. And you can't do that all day long because you do have your own block meter and that will get depleted if you just try and block every single thing that happens in front of you. But it did really still feel like I just ended up having to parry everything, and I couldn't use a lot of the fun stuff in my Force arsenal, for example, in those encounters. Like, it got a little bit simple in those moments. I thought that was a shame. I would have liked for there to be some more maybe environmental options that I could lean into or not lean into. Just some more choices I could make to play those battles in different ways would have been really cool. Instead, it pretty much came down to, well, which stance are you using? But your stance is just one of many pieces of your kit, and I really would have liked to see some more possibilities in this area. However, there are mini bosses in the world, and there are just sort of hordes of enemies enemies in the world that you can use the full extent of your abilities on, and that's really fun when it happens. So it's not all bad, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is a real flaw. I thought the combat was fantastic overall, just not quite perfect for me. And mixing gameplay and story for a moment here, I also absolutely adore all of the dialogue that they have written for characters in the world, just doing little yelps and grunts and talking to each other while they don't know that you are there. This stuff is so joyous. The number of droid conversations that you hear where the droid is saying, I would never be commanded like that, and then the droid gets commanded and it just starts doing the thing, and it's just that sort of very familiar Star Wars-y humor, and it's there time and time again, and every single one of those conversations lands, and it feels fantastic, to the point that in some areas I actually felt bad for the random droid nobodies that I was killing. Like, I wanted to do something else for them. I wanted to maybe befriend them or something, because I would hear about their lives a little bit before my lightsaber went through their foreheads. But I loved it. I really loved that sort of stuff. And they clearly paid a lot of attention to making things happen like that in the world that the fans would get a chuckle out of, but then also in certain areas would shock the fan base in really positive ways. I'm not going to spoil any of these, but there are several moments in the game where you encounter either a certain enemy or certain boss or whatever, and you are going to fly out of your chair when this happens, because it's just either so cool or so unexpected, or it feels so epic and so powerful in that moment. And the fact that the game has managed to create several instances of that feeling being evoked in me instead of just like one maybe in the final climax of the game is testament to how good this game is. The world itself, though, felt a little less surprising, which I thought was a little unfortunate, actually. I really love the environment, and I love the world, and I love the way that they've crafted it all, and the puzzles are really entertaining, and there are lots of puzzles, and there's lots of jumping and platforming and things like that, which all felt very fluid and fun. But I did end up getting to a point where I sort of felt like I knew exactly what the rest of the world was going to look like, even if I hadn't gone there, because it's the same sorts of tricks and the same sorts of puzzles. Like, it didn't really feel like I was ever pushing into a new area and going, oh, wow, I wonder what kind of thing they might have put in this zone. Like, I knew what was going to be in that zone. It was going to be a pyrite shard if I went under the staircase. It was going to be a box that I could access if I went a little bit further, and that would have a character outfit in it. And then maybe it would be an echo as well, somewhere in there too. And then I would just go to the next area, and it would be the same thing again. And it would have been nice for there to have been a bit more variation to that, I feel like. Especially because it doesn't always feel great doing loads of exploring and sort of pushing through these puzzly areas just to end up getting, like, some trousers out of a box. Like, several times in the game, I wanted it to be something that would affect my gameplay, and instead it was purely cosmetic, and I was like, well, I get why they've done that, but at the same time, it doesn't really incentivize me personally to really push into a lot of these areas, because I'm kind of happy with how my cal looks already. That said, there is really stark contrast between the different worlds that you can visit via your ship, and not all of them are full worlds. I should be very, very clear about that. I don't want people to get confused. Some of these worlds are actually just moons, and some of those moons are actually just a moon facility, and they are significantly less big than some of the other spaces in the game. And so you get a great flavor of a new environment and a new kind of biome, but it's a flavor that doesn't last very long, because you kind of find yourself heading back to familiar territory to explore that larger space pretty often. But at least they look nice, and I think that's something that this game needs some credit for. It looks gorgeous. I think that there's some really beautiful vistas that they've made. I think that the way that they've designed those actual spaces as well is fantastic, because I really felt like I was in a Star Wars film over and over again throughout this game. Certain corridors, even just certain like electron walls that were between different rooms in a facility or whatever, just felt so Star Wars, and they did such a good job of being true to source material and bringing that stuff to life for you to interact with. But I played the entire game on PS5, and I played the whole game with my performance mode turned on, so I was not going for high graphics, I was going for high performance, and I think purely on a technical level, on console, the game does suffer a little bit. It's not too bad, but it wasn't as smooth as I would have liked. And I mentioned, I just played Dead Island 2 the other day, right? And that game looks gorgeous. It's super crispy on PS5, looks absolutely fantastic. Never had any frame drops. It was a great time. And the reason I bring it up is because the contrast when I jumped into Jedi Survivor was painful, because especially at the beginning of the game on Coruscant, there's frame tearing, which I never expected to see on console. It's basically got permanent DLSS on, which means that everything has a fuzzy outline to it, and when you kind of move around, there's almost a drift from the previous frame being blended with the current frame, just to try and interpolate to get up to 60 FPS. But in several areas, it doesn't even manage to get to 60 FPS, it doesn't even get close. And like I said, especially on Coruscant at the start, that performance feels dreadful. I was terrified that the whole game was going to be like that and I'd be playing at 20 FPS for 25 hours. Thankfully, it does improve, and when you get off Coruscant, the performance seems more optimized. I think that the Coruscant world, for whatever reason, just really struggles in that opening section. But I should also mention, I was playing without the day one patch because I've been playing a review build for the past week, and they told me not to allow the game to update if there was an update in that time, just for save corruption purposes. So it may be that these issues are much improved once the game is out in the public's hands, but my experience of the graphics was that the actual visuals themselves were gorgeous, but the game's ability to render them was pretty subpar at times. I also should mention that I think a lot of people won't care about what I'm saying here at all because they think the DLSS is totally fine. I just personally would have avoided that particular method of optimization if I had a choice, but I guess to get that choice, I just should have been on PC. Still, despite any very, very minor gripes with the way that they've done that kind of rendering tech, I thought the game, on the whole, was simply amazing. I am so glad that this exists. I am so glad that Respawn make video games. I am so glad that they've been so faithful, I think, to the previous game, or at least as far as I can tell, and so faithful to Star Wars in general. And I think that if you're a big fan of the franchise, you're going to be able to sink maybe 50, 60, 70 hours even potentially into this game, thanks to the New Game Plus and all of those side quests and everything else that it has on offer. And for people like me, who just sort of dip into Star Wars here and there, but don't follow it super crazy closely, it's still an absolute blast and so worth picking up and probably paying full price for, especially if that means that you manage to avoid spoilers and you get to experience this story for the first time, totally fresh. I've been MrRoflWaffles, thanks for watching this review. If you've enjoyed it, then please leave a like. And if you want to watch my full playthrough of the game, I'll have it linked on screen right now and in the description down below on my Milo Plays YouTube channel. I'll see you guys there. Bye for now.